there are still seeds of division already planted, and the inaugural poem itself sort of hints at that we're not quite there yet. Our democracy is still this incredible work in progress, right? It's still a great social experiment, and that a democracy is not, it's not a noun, it's a verb. It's something we have to constantly work at.
In 2023, Richard Blanco was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Biden from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And it gives us a perfect opportunity as a son born in Cuban roots, living in South Florida, an excellent opportunity for us to talk about all of the intersections of what we're going and watching going on in our world. So I welcome Richard Blanco to Unapologetically Queer, and I understand you are unapologetically queer. Is that correct?
Pretty much. I love that term. I love the title of all this. But yeah, not always, of course. A different generation. I was very apologetic, obviously, growing up.
Yeah. The big news this year, of course, is President Biden presenting you with the National Humanities Medal from the National Endowment of the Humanities. When you got the news that you were going to be presented that honor and by President Biden, what was your reaction when you first heard?
Well, of course, incredibly honored, especially because historically it's sort of a lifetime achievement award, and usually in the past it's people don't get that kind of medal till like they're 70 or something like that. So so I was thrilled on that end, but also as I'm thrilled even with receiving the news back in 2012 with the White House. I just always think of my family, my community, everything that I represent, my queer community, my immigrant community, and knowing that that honor is not just for myself, but for all of us. And to represent that is always a really special feeling and a great charge to have.
Having recognition and having a Lifetime Achievement Award, as you said, the medal represents, and you're definitely not in your 70s. To have one recognition from one president of the United States is amazing, and it's always amazing. But to be recognized twice. In 2012, you're the Poet Laureate for the presidential inauguration of the second term for President Obama. I remember watching that moment, and we, many of my friends in queer community talked about the representation of you doing that. What was that like for you first, just as poet, to be able to participate in the inauguration of such a historic moment of the Blackness and the representation of how change was going on in America? What was that like for you?
Again, it's such an incredible honor, and also so much bigger than yourself. And a lot of times people ask me, was I nervous, reading in front of 1 million people at the mall and 40 million across the world. And my answer is at that moment, you realize that I wasn't as nervous as you would think, because at that moment you feel like you're something much larger. You feel like you're part of something much larger than yourself. Just what the community, how all the, it's almost reverent. You feel like you're in service. It's not even about the president. It wasn't even about Beyonce that she sung the national anthem. We really all feel this incredible sense of service and representation. I will tell you a little anecdote that really brought it home. I was asked to attend the HRC ball, and my publicist at the time said I couldn't attend, but they all planned to sort of surprise the whole party, and so I showed up on stage, and they put on the clip from that day, and that's when it really hit home. Started cheering, and I just really realized at that moment, some person is reading this poem to the entire country, and he's gay,
Yeah.
and it's me.
Yeah.
and and I remember that in the president's speech, he said for the first time he equated the our cause to a civil rights cause, to a human rights cause,
Yeah.
and that was the first time any president had ever said that. So.
Yeah.
So all that anyway, that's when it really hit me, and I was like, "My family,"
And that
and
representation. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
and
curious.
to be loved, and loved back. It was just so amazing.
I'm curious, Richard. I was going to talk about this a little later, but since you bring it up, President Obama came to gay marriage later. He famously said, "I had to evolve in my understanding of LGBT," and then he makes the equation that LGBT is like civil rights, and that it is a process of moving forward. We didn't know when you were reading the poem on the National Mall for the 2012 inauguration that the clock was starting to tick down to 3 years before gay marriage recognition. You think about it 10 years ago of that moment for you, and all of the incredible achievements that have been that have occurred in the last decade, but also the incredible frightening issues that we've seen in politics, an attack on LGBT. The 2017 inauguration, a bit different than the one previous that you got to participate in. What do you think about the world that we're watching and the politics of what's happened in the last 10 years since you were on the National Mall reading a poem as a gay poet in front of 40 million Americans? Where do you think we are today, and why do you think we're here?
Yeah, something I've obviously thought about and especially compared, right? Things. I mean, things were certainly much better back in 2013, but there were still seeds of division already planted, and the inaugural poem itself sort of hints at that we're not quite there yet. And one of the lessons I learned, well, not lessons, but one thing that really struck a realization rather, was that our democracy is still this incredible work in progress, right? It's still a great social experiment, and that a democracy is not. It's not a noun, it's a verb. It's something we have to constantly work at. And so while I wish things were different, it's also lit a fire under my butt, so to speak. There's something, to get back and as I did when I was much younger, and think about what I can do to participate, to help, to represent, to make sure we don't take 20 steps back again. It's difficult, but I'm an internal optimist and a sort of a little bit of a Pollyanna, but I'm always hopeful. But where I am right now is I wouldn't say I'm grateful for the fight, but it's we got to show up, and I think it's especially important as an older LGBTQ part of our community, as an older member, to really pull forward our younger community, so that they fortunately, maybe, I think, may have not had to go through what we've gone through in early years. And I think we can serve as mentors for them, and thinking about, hey, we've been through this before and it's not pretty. If we go back 20 steps, right? Like coming out in high school in my day and age wasn't even a possibility, right? It wasn't even a thing. It just didn't happen. So I think, we have to, batten down the hatches, so to speak. And that's what I'm trying to do by using the platforms I have, these incredible honors, to continue or pick up the fight. Rather, it's never really has ended, right?
One other thing that I'm curious of, that's your observation of comparing and contrasting, is doing the poem that you did for the inauguration for the second term for President Obama. You are a professor at Florida International. You live here in South Florida. I'm curious about what you think about what we're watching in Florida, and from an artist perspective, a writer's perspective. the history of what we're watching. You are in Miami-Dade County. I want to talk about your Cuban roots in a moment, but we watched, with the pie in the face in the 1970s of Anita Bryant and what we're going through today for LGBTQ. What do you think about what we're watching in Florida? Any eye or observation or great words there?
Well, I think it's fairly obvious what's happening. It does echo back when you're talking about my immigrant roots and my parents' stories about communist Cuba and sort of the tactics and the banning of books and this. It's gotten very bad, especially in the educational world. And I'm sure every professor is feeling terrified about academic freedom. But like, for example, you can report somebody anonymously for doing this or doing that, and it reminds me of the stories my parents would tell me about. Your own neighbor would accuse you of something, and suddenly you were in trouble and had to show up and whatever, clear your name or not or whatnot. So it's scary for me on that level, because it's sort of like I know a little more inside story from what my parents have been through. Like I said, there's. It's so draconian, and it's so like attacking. Of course, the education system is a way of controlling things. For me personally, I think like what happened at the new school and people are leaving and professors. I can't say that it hasn't crossed my mind. Even when from the time I began at FIU, things have changed radically. And so I've thought of like, why am I doing this? And I answer myself saying like, no, that's exactly what these people, this system wants us to get out of there. And I'm like, no, I'm going to stay. I'm going to, I'm going to keep on pushing back and fighting this. And I think, again, it's sort of given me some kind of purpose or additional fuel, additional fire into my butt to keep on remembering that we can't take our rights for granted. But it's sad. It's and on so many levels, and different communities and groups that, this creating a white Christian state. I never thought I'd see that happen. And I think it's ironic, especially in Miami-Dade, because I think a lot of the supporters of this, whatever you want to call it, this administration, this agenda and this administration, they don't really see that, at some point they're coming for them too. That there's that famous quote, poem that I can't remember now, that said, first they came for X and I didn't say nothing. Then they came for Y and they didn't say something. Then they came for Z and I didn't send it. And then the final line is, then they came for me and there was nobody left to speak up.
Yeah.
And I think, I fear Miami is such a cultural capital that they're not understanding that all these rules and laws and bills are really, at the end, decaying, are going to really chip away at our city, at our county. And Fort Lauderdale too. Yeah, everything.
And I'm in Fort Lauderdale. Broward County is facing the same kinds of situations. I want to talk a moment about South Florida. And then I do want to talk about Cuba. Florida International University is interesting to me because I repeatedly read that with a gigantic student population, it is the most culturally diverse, ethnicity diverse university in America. And of course makes perfect sense in Miami-Dade County. But it's interesting, in all of the fight and all of the argument that is going on in Florida, we are watching a radical conservative and a radical evangelical rejection of diversity. And at the end of the day, they're rejecting the basic concept of why Florida International University is so great, is the diversity. And you represent that. I was reading that your mother was 7 months pregnant. Family exiles out of Cuba, goes to Madrid, and eventually to New York. Tell me a little bit, obviously, in South Florida. For those that haven't spent much time in South Florida, our Latino community and definitely our Cuban community here in South Florida is so rich and so diverse. Tell me a little bit about your feelings about Cuba and the diversity that you represent in community.
Sure. I should mention too that I'm a two-time graduate from FIU, so I'm a product of that same diversity, and also how the community it serves, which is a lot of working class kids, just like I was. So I got my engineering degree and my creative writing degree from FIU. So being there is even more special to me because it's a way of giving back. So, and a special connection. But yeah, I think it was our Pulitzer Prize winning columnist from the Miami Herald years and years ago, Liz Balmaceda, said, "We love living in Miami because it's so close to the United States, and you don't need a passport, you know."
That's
So,
a great joke.
so I've thought a lot about it, and it's a lot of it comes through in my poetry, and it's the major topic and theme of my poetry: home, place, belonging. So I mean, the way I describe growing up in Miami was like growing up between two real imaginary worlds. One, of course, is the world of Cuba, and not just my family, but also the whole community at large, of this mythical place, this wondrous place that we're going back to, this place that I belonged to or came from, but I wasn't even born there. So it felt real, and yet it was very imaginary. And then the other sort of real imagined world was America, or the United States, because clearly 90% of my classmates all, from kindergarten on, were pretty much like me. Children of exiles. So there was this mythical America in terms of all the TV shows and foods and commercials and things like that. That American cheese was like a thrill for me whenever my parents would get it for us. So, and I love that. I love that Miami exists between these two worlds, and I think it's even more so now. Back then it was diverse, but again, I think it was a far majority of Cuban and Cuban exiles and children of Cuban parents. And what I love how the city has flourished to be much more pan-Latino and much more diverse in general. And it does feel like there's few cities in the world where you feel like you are in this place. One of them, of course, is New Orleans, right? And it usually happens when you have a confluence of all these different cultures that create a new sense of place. So I love that about the city. I have to say that I've ran away from Miami twice because I did want to also explore, what is this real America in my mind. And now and I got angry at Miami for a while because it had changed so much and grew so big. But now I came back about 4 years ago, really loving it and accepting it's like this big grown up city. That's one. And about Cuba, I visited Cuba for the first time in 1994. I had started writing about cultural identity and negotiation of identities, and so naturally I felt I had to go to Cuba. And my mother's entire family stayed in Cuba, all her 8 brothers and sisters, her parents. So I had this huge family in Cuba, and that was an amazing sort of filling in so many blanks of things that were just stories and anecdotes and letters that came from Cuba and black and white photos that they would send. And then finally, I loved the experience, but I also felt like, as it is now, it's really hard to have an intimate relationship with the island. There's so much political jazz, but it's just so hard to even get there, and expensive. And you always live in a little bit of fear when you're visiting, because you carry your parents' fear of, I'm going to be arrested at any moment. And so I realized that the Cuba that real imaginary place sort of still stays somewhat in my imagination, because it's really the Cuba of my parents and grandparents and their stories, and it's still there in part, but it's a different Cuba, and it is its own country in its own way that kept on evolving past what I know it to be through my parents' stories and my community stories. I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh no, and I just think that I mean, there's other thoughts on that, but I also was asked to write a poem and recite it at the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Cuba, and I thought this is the final sort of the beginning of this lifting what I call the emotional embargo, because besides the economic embargo, there's a lot of complex layers of pain and hurt and a lot of psychology going on that I think our community needs to heal and get through. So it's Cuba's always been a difficult, just when you think you're getting close where things are going to change, then they close the embassy and all this stuff. So it's something I think about a lot, but I'm also sort of realizing now at 55 that this is ultimately my home, this country, and especially Miami, and Cuba feels a little further and further away
Yeah.
with each time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Your family from Havana or where in Cuba?
No, there's a city on the southern coast that's called City of Cienfuegos, and my first book is named after the city, which is City of 100 Fires, so
Yeah.
Cienfuegos.
Nice.
So it's beautiful, more influenced by the French because they used to trade with New Orleans a lot. But they're in and around. The whole family is scattered around all the towns, sugar mill towns that
Yeah.
surround that major city. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah. I've been to Cienfuegos many times. I know the city well.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
I wanted to ask you about the LGBT intersections of your place as a writer artist in Cuba and Miami-Dade County. Now we've watched. We brought the show to Havana Pride in May of 2019, and I've been to Cuba more than a dozen times. We've watched a transformation in Cuba for LGBT rights, setting aside all of the politics for a moment, and the specific queer community in Cuba, marriage recognition, the national referendum, other kinds of things. What do you think about LGBT rights in Cuba? What observation do you have of what we've seen over the last number of years?
I haven't. It's interesting as I haven't really tracked that a lot, mostly because when I go to Cuba, I'm living with my family in El Campo, in the countryside, and I have like absolutely or can't connect with any kind of recognizable LGBT community. Like things have, I forget Fidel Castro's daughter, right, was
Mariella?
opening up. So I think it's Mariella, right, and I think it's I find I'm still skeptical because there's so many limits on rights, but it seems to be authentic, and I'm glad for it. But it's as it is in most of Latin American countries, or at least Central American and Caribbean. It isn't gay, or the community isn't like how we understand it in the United States. Or it's like you can go to Havana and pick up, a gay rag and see where the coolest, gay club is.
Yeah, right.
And I found that's partly cultural, and it's not just because of the communist regime, but even when you go to like parts of Mexico or outside of Mexico City, it's not like a plug and play. And I've spoken about this in several countries, and they look to the United States as a model of like, how did you do this? How can we do this? How does this work? How do we, And again, I think there's idiosyncrasies about the culture that, we can talk about machismo. Every culture has machismo, but but also on the other sense, at least with Cubans, I'll speak for Cubans, and referring back to Reynaldo Arenas, who's sort of the author and poet who really dove into sort of the gay world in Havana in particular. And he calls it's one of the gayest countries in the world.
Yeah.
It's like so homoerotic,
Yeah.
and because it's a very machismo, which is interesting and ironic. But I'm glad that again, I think the changes are authentic, I guess. But I do find it ironic that on the other hand, they're limiting they're cracking down on so many other rights.
There's
So yeah,
contradictions there in terms of how they deal with LGBT versus civil and political
right.
rights. It's very
And
interesting.
and the record back, in the day of like during the AIDS crisis, that they put everybody in camps, and so
Yeah,
so.
terrible.
But maybe it's Marianela, who has a different view.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the intersection of, and you touch on it, and I know in representing your Cuban roots, but I want to talk about Latino in general. Well, we're big advocates. We do one of our 10 pillar missions is for Latino LGBTQ plus community. We're big supporters of the Gay Ocho Festival, which is the largest diversity LGBT Hispanic festival in America. How do you think South Florida, Miami-Dade County, but in general, how do you think Latino community is doing on LGBT? It always seems to be a bit contradictory to me, so it's an excellent opportunity to ask from your eye, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's something thought about a lot, and also it's in my poetry. It's something I call cultural sexuality, right? That the intersection of these two things, and that that you can't sort of separate those things because they affect how you think of yourself, how you think of your community, how you think yourself as a gay man, and so. One of the things, again, it is that sense of machismo, which is, I don't want to speak for every Latin American country, but the idea being that it's about pretense or appearance, right? So, like my grandmother used to say, well, many in the community would say, "Es mejor serlo y no parecerlo que parecerlo y no serlo," which is to say, it is more honorable to be gay and not act gay than it is to act gay, even if you're not gay. So, so the idea being
Wow,
that,
that's
yeah,
wild.
and I think that affects our sensibility of being more forthright and open, just in general in our everyday life. It's really about the crime is, at least for a gay man or even for a gay woman, is to not be heteronorm or appear heteronormative. The crime is to be feminine, because in a hyper machismo culture, that is the crime. So, my mother has told me stories about, like, as long as you're married and pretend and like you have kids, nobody cares. But my mother tells me, like, "Oh, you didn't know your uncle whatever was gay?" I'm like, "No." I never forget one time she told me, "Yeah, even his wife knows."
Yeah,
so
it's
so it's a little messier and blurrier, in the ways that we and I think something else happens too, right? When you are come as an immigrant, right, or you grow up in an immigrant culture, as it's a hyper, it's just it becomes an exaggeration of your culture, because I always say Miami is more Cuban than Cuba, because you want to celebrate and make sure you don't lose that culture. And so having to, traditions are great, cultural attachments are great, but they're also very limiting. But I think since that is such a presence for immigrant and new communities, then there is that, I can't break free from the tribe and be this kind of person. I think that also complicates things for us
yeah,
culturally.
yeah, yeah. Richard, I want to first apologize to you. I did not know until I was preparing this interview with you that you are the first ever poet laureate of Miami-Dade County. I just cannot believe this gay man in Miami-Dade County is the first poet laureate for Miami-Dade County. You have, congratulations. We love
Thank you.
that. We share on that honor in the entire LGBTQ community in South Florida, especially. You have as poet laureate, you have a poetry project called Miami's Favorite Poems Project. Tell us a little bit about that platform and how it works and what's it designed to do.
Sure. So, first, I should say that, growing up working class, immigrant, my parents didn't speak English. I had very little access to the arts and humanities, and like we didn't even have books at home. So as I become a poet, I always look to I look to see how I can create more and more access to the arts, the humanities, the poetry in particular. It's a big sort of self-imposed mission because I want little kids have that earlier in life, contrary to what's happening in the state of Florida. So this is I wanted to do something that was very inclusive, that involved community, that involved everyday folks. And the project, I got to give honor where honor, credit where credit is due, was a project that Robert Pinsky, our former U.S. Poet Laureate, started maybe 15 years ago. And the idea is that, a lot of people say, oh, I don't get poetry, I don't read poetry. But then you ask them, do you have a favorite poem? And 9 times out of 10, they will have a poem that has stuck with them most of their life or all their life, that has something meaning and has changed their life in a significant way, from a fireman to like a bank teller to, all walks of life. And so the idea is for people to, it's at miamidade.gov/or/poetry, and you upload your favorite poem and your backstory of how that poem came to be. And so we want to create this archive of these beautiful moments of storytelling that revolves Miami. And I want to say, it's not just Miami-Dade. Anybody who has an emotional connection to South Florida, like it's really bigger than, the Miami-Dade border, because so many of us live elsewhere, but also have Miami roots, and even, brother and sister, or sister and sister, whatever, with Fort Lauderdale and Broward County. So, that's the idea. And then we do community events. We're going to have actually, hopefully, and I don't want to say too much, but we're going to have a meeting of favorite poems from Broward County and Miami-Dade County, and sort of
excellent. That's
a little mashup.
That's
mashup
right.
with that.
Excellent. We always play with the competitiveness between Miami-Dade and Broward County. I live in Broward County. We have the preeminent gay community at Welton Manors in Fort Lauderdale,
Right.
and y'all, you have some gay people down there in Miami-Dade County too. But we always make the joke, if we come down for events and activities in Miami-Dade County, it takes a long time to get down there because we have to bring our passport, and we have to go through passport control to cross the county line.
Well, some of these things we actually do community events where the people come and share live, and we've done 2, one at the Miami Book Fair and one at a library in Pinecrest. And so we're thinking of maybe doing a pop-up tent right on the county line or something.
That would be absolutely awesome, and the illustration would be hilarious. Richard, if you in your go forward with the project, make sure you talk to us, because we're a big supporter and sponsor of the Miami Book Fair. We do a line program that we do in broadcast called the LGBT banned book club, and we've talked about to dozens of authors around the country facing the book bans and the issues that they're facing. We're a big supporter of the written word and the value of the written word. And so as your projects unveil, please make sure you reach out to us. The one thing I do want to ask you about in terms of poetry and like this project that you just talked about in Miami, how does LGBT interact for you here in South Florida and generally about LGBT? We're all about our music, we're all about our theater, we're all about our dance, we're all about our parties. How are we about our written word and poetry, LGBT?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure at large, but I know that from the students that come through my classrooms, poetry, it's a way of processing things. It's a way of really understanding oneself. And I got to say, I don't think I would have come out when I did if I hadn't started writing, because writing creates an introspection. It also creates community, because when you start sharing parts of yourself, you make connections and realize, oh, there's other gay people around me. So poetry is always sort of it's always had, it's always been the ugly stepsister, so to speak, but it's there. I think we appreciate it. I think in general, our communities support all kinds of arts, but I would say it's important because not just in particular to LGBT LGBTQ rights and whatnot, because I think what poetry does and what other arts do is to put real names and faces and lives to issues that sometimes get or abstracted or just twisted politically. And when someone bears witness through a poem, whether you're writing it or whether you're listening to it, it really can affect us, and it can help also galvanize us, if we think about what a poem can do and how it can make us think and prop us up and motivate us, and also connect and not feel so alone. That's part of what the meetups or the community readings of favorite poems projects are, to realize you're not alone, right? You're not alone in these feelings. You're not alone in these problems, these things you want to take up, and you find strength and support. So I think there's a long history of gay poets as well that we can look at. One of the things we have obviously a lot of not problems with, but it's hard to maintain our history or to give people a history other than Stonewall. And so reading gay poets like Adrienne Rich and whatnot, give us a sense that we've been here. I mean, Whitman was gay, right? So we've been here for a while, and we've been representing in literature, and I think that's another way of thinking about it.
One of our anchors, I remind viewers, Greg Shapiro, 8 books of poetry featured this year at an award recipient at the Miami Book Fair. Every month he hosts at Bona on Wilton Drive a poetry event for LGBTQ community, and we invite you to participate in it. Richard, I appreciate you saying what you said, because I have always believed that written word and poetry can be as an important activist tool for LGBT as marching in the street, because it can generate an emotional response. I wanted to ask you, in terms of multiple books that you've written, new projects. You'll be coming back to Florida International in the fall. Any new projects that we should be aware of?
Oh yes. I did. Before we leave the last question, I just realized I've done a poem for Freedom to Marry, and so poetry also helps. I've been helping like organizations by using by lending my voice and my talent and whatnot to helping them do what they do, which is they can do it better than I can do it. A few years ago, Sam Adams, for their Pride Month campaign, asked me to write a poem, and they filmed it at Stonewall. It was amazing what they did, and I wrote a poem for Pulse that is part of hopefully even be part of the memorial there. So I just want to say that I firmly believe what you just said as well, and I try to, whenever I can, put that poetry out there, so that helps us think about ourselves and reflect on ourselves. New projects, very exciting. I have the second production of a play I wrote with Vanessa Garcia, co-wrote with Vanessa Garcia, is going to debut at the Actors Playhouse, which is the old Miracle Theater on Miracle Mile, and that'll be November 3rd. So we're very excited about that. It's called Sweet Goats and Blueberry Senoritas. And there's a gay character in there, of course, and it really talks about place, home, and belonging, and identities and how we come together to understand each other, and the families that we form, and the communities that we form. So in that way, I feel like it's gayer than most people think, because when we have to form our own families is when we come out, and we have to form our own communities and sort of just re-socialize ourselves in a different way. So that's exciting. I'm also working on a musical. Gay, gotta do a musical.
Right.
I'm not, just as a co-lyricist, though, I can't even play a bongo. And it deals with, it's called Waiting for Snow in Havana. It's adaptation of the famous book by Carlos Aire that details his fleeing Cuba through the Operation Peter Pan, which was the airlifting of children. 14,000 children. It's the largest airlift in the Western Hemisphere of children that came without their parents, and the hope was that the parents would be able to get out. And so a lot of them did, but some didn't, and a lot spent years without their parents. You wouldn't think that's part that's part and parcel for a musical, but it's a different kind of musical.
Yeah.
So that's exciting.
I also
And
understand you have a new book coming.
yeah, in October I have October 24th. You can pre-order if you like. It's called Homeland of My Body, and it's new and selected, which means I put in about 30 new poems, so it's not a full collection of new poems, and then selections of all my 4 books in between those years. And it really tells the journey of what is the main theme of my home is how, what is home? How do we find that? And home to me is also, in a sense, one of the homes I found was, home in the sense of safe space and community when I did come out, right? It's another kind of home. It's not a country, but it's like it's a connection. It's a psychological home that we all belong to. And so that's part of the search that I think is about home too. And that's in there. A lot of love poems for my husband and a lot of breakup poems from my mid-20s.
That's funny. And your new book through Amazon, or where do you recommend getting it?
You can get it anywhere, of course, but it is published through Beacon Press, so
Beacon.
That's the best place to get it. Or any of those indie sites that I think IndieBound, right, where they all conglomerate all the, and of course Books and Books.
Yes, Books and Books, exactly.
We'll be having a big debut there on December 2nd.
Oh, excellent. Well, and we also want to drive. My goodness, as you can tell in this short review of Richard Blanco, there is a lot here, and you can get many more details by going to his website, richard-blanco.com. There's lots of information there, and see storied history as our poet laureate of Miami-Dade County. But also he did this little tiny thing in 2012 by being poet laureate of the inauguration of President Obama, and then this year being recognized by President Biden as the National Humanities Medal winner, presented by the National Endowment for the Humanities. What an amazing achievement. And when you come back to South Florida, we for sure would like to talk to you more. You're just right over the border from us here in Fort Lauderdale and Broward County.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'll make sure that you don't have to bring a passport.
Yeah, exactly. Richard Blanco, thank you so much.
This has been great, and I'm just saying I'm due for a visit to Wilton Manors. It's been a while, so
exactly. Everyone should come to Wilton Manors.
I need to get I need to get my gay license renewed.
Yes, exactly right. It's time for that to be renewed. Richard Blanco, thank you so much for being with us today on Unapologetically Queer.
Thank you, Al. It's been great.